Welcome to part 2. Welcome to the machine. No. Anyway, Pink Floyd. So here's the resin pour part of the video, including the screw ups and the fixes. But before we get to the resin pour, a few fine little detail touch ups. I want to dry brush these bits of styrofoam rock and make sure that, you know, the bottom is touched up and dry and everything looks good there. And I said it before in the first part of the video. Oh, if you haven't seen the first video, I'll try to put a little card here in the corner of the video or a link in the description for you to watch how I prepared this entire base. But as I said in part 1, I really would have done well to have poured the resin first, let it dry, and then added all the top terrain afterward, I think, or at least the foam rocks afterward. If I would have taken this base, you know, carved it out, plastered it, did everything, airbrushed the bed and sealed the bed and everything, and even did the sand and the rocks on top, or the paver base on top, and left the foam rocks around the waterbed there till very last, I would have done better, because it would just be a little bit less to move around, and a little less that I had to navigate around in order to dry brush and touch up the bank of the waterbed and stuff there, because I do go through and I touch up the bank with AK Terrains mixed with a little bit of gray paint to fill in the space on the inside of the rocks there, where you would see a little bit of the foam from the diorama that I sprayed, the XPS foam that I spray painted black. A little bit of that showed through there, and here I'm touching it up. So I would have done better just to put these styrofoam rocks on dead last, and saved myself a little bit of time loss in the process of going through and touching all this up. And I think it would have looked better also because I could have let the paver base and the sand and the actual terrain right up to the edge of the riverbed and then put the styrofoam rocks on top. I think that would have been a better approach. So in hindsight, there's always something you can take away from this. And that's what I'm taking away from this and sharing with you. And, it's not that it's a wrong way. It's that there is a better way. And at the end of the day, I got a great looking dio. And that's what's important. It's a great looking dio. It's something I'm happy with. I can create some really cool photos with. And you live and learn with some of these things, and it's a process. And some of this stuff, I hadn't done before. And so I had to kind of pre-think and pre-plan and kind of figure everything out before I really double-check each step of the way before I got to the resin pour part of it, because once I pour the resin, it's it. Everything has to be right up to that point for sure, as far as being sealed and being dry and having the right color, and making sure all the sand and everything was all the way down and it wasn't move or any loose granules moving around to get into the resin. So with all that being done, we're going to go ahead now and get the resin poured. And I'm going to show you where I screwed up, and I'm going to tell you why I screwed up. I screwed up primarily because I didn't thoroughly read the directions. Okay, I'm a guy. Mix this stuff up and pour it on, right, in equal parts. That's what it is. Yeah, that's what it is. But look at all those bubbles in that resin. And you might not think, okay, that's not a big deal, so what? But when I took the equal parts of resin and hardener and I mixed it in the container, so I measured out an amount in one container and I measured out an amount of the hardener in the other container. Then I poured those both into this container and mixed them. It says mix it for 3 minutes. Well, I did that. I mixed it like I was making a meringue, like I was making a Boston cream pie. I was mixing that stuff up, happy on my way to being able to pour this resin. And then I pour it all in there and I'm like, well, okay, it's some bubbles, but it says you can use a torch and get rid of the bubbles, or lightly spray an isopropyl on top and it'll get rid of the bubbles. Boy, was I wrong. So there's all those bubbles, and like I say, it's not a problem. I'll get my torch out and I'll pop those little bubbles. Something else to consider that I would have done well to put those styrofoam rocks on last is because they're styrofoam. And I'm about to do what? Bring a torch out. Styrofoam and torches do not go well together unless you're after that effect. Anyway, so the torch wasn't going to be in one spot very long I wasn't like going to hover it over the rocks or something. So it wasn't that big a deal, but the heat that hits the resin and spreads out over the dio could potentially melt the rocks. And so here we are. You can see these bubbles starting to surface. There's a lot of them, and that's because I aerated the heck out of this, man. I mixed it fast, like I was fluffing eggs for an omelet. You don't want to do that. But before we get on to the next part of it, you want to mix this slowly and thoroughly for 3 minutes. You can see I've got a spot up there that doesn't have resin on it. I had to mix a little bit more resin to make sure that I got all areas of the waterbed covered. Now, here's my other problem, and I'll talk more about this later. When I cut the recess out for the bed where I was going to pour the resin, I wasn't thinking, an inch and a half is that deep, right? I mean, it doesn't sound that deep. It's at maximum depth, this, recess is probably about, an inch and a quarter deep. Let's say an inch and a quarter deep. And at minimum depth up there where the shoreline is, it goes shallower, maybe, quarter inch or something like that. I didn't think it was an issue to have it so deep, and it's not, because you can pour this, then let it dry a few hours according to the directions, and then go ahead and pour more back over the top. And you can go to a maximum depth like that in that process, let it dry a bit and pour some more. I didn't do that, man. I went right for it, baby. We poured it all in. And the problem with that is that there's going to be bubbles that don't surface before this resin starts to dry. And I'm going to show you here in a minute. I'm mixing more resin out of the frame right here so that we can get the upper right corner up there submerged and have enough resin to cover everything. But it's okay because, and see the lower left and a little spot on the upper camera left up there also, there's I didn't have enough resin mixed. I had some extra on standby, but I didn't want to mix too much, and then I have to throw it out. So I'd rather pour what I thought would be enough and then add a little bit more to it, because it's expensive. It's, like I said, it's about $125 worth of resin, man. And yeah, but anyway, we weren't going to waste it, man. This was going to work, I tell you. So as I'm mixing up more resin outside of the frame here, you can see these bubbles start to surface, and that's okay. We're gonna deal with those, and we're gonna have, what I think is going to be a great result when I cover it up and leave it for the morning. And you'll see here what actually ended up happening. But let's get this other batch of resin poured in here. See, and I mixed this resin really fast too, because I'm the kind of guy that gets the IKEA furniture and just looks at the cover of the box and tries to put it together. I don't always read instructions, and I urge you in this case to read the instructions. And you get 50% hardener, 50% resin, mix it for 3 minutes thoroughly but slowly. Here you can see, man, I'm making cream. Right? Making cream, baby. I'm trying to get the most bubbles in there as I can. And it's working. Look at that. Embarrassing. But I'm sharing this with you guys because not only because I was able to fix this for the most part, but because it was fun. And it's something I'm going to do again, but I'm going to do a whole lot better. And the errors that did remain at the end are not even... I'm not selling a $12,000 resin coffee table, so I really don't care. If there's a bubble in the end of this, under the surface somewhere, or a little, a couple little bubbles here and there, I'm photographing it. Yeah, I can Photoshop it out. It's not a big deal. So I really wasn't that concerned about it. But what concerns me is I do want to do it right and the correct way. And so anyway, we got the extra resin poured in here. And we've got enough to get it all covered and make sure everything is submerged down in there. Get it all out using that. I'm using a chopstick, actually. I couldn't find my popsicle stick, so I used a chopstick, but whatever. Sometimes I just make this stuff up as I go, man, you know. But in a case like this where the materials cost a little bit, you know, it's better to make sure that you've got it right. And I'm old and stubborn, so I think, what could possibly go wrong? It's just resin, man. Look at all those bubbles. So we're going to get the torch out here in a minute. And the instructions say, you know, let it set for a couple minutes. And then get your torch out and you can get those bubbles out of there. But what the instructions didn't say, or what I didn't realize also, was that even after you torch the top and just lightly, you're not torching it like you're trying to set it on fire or something, do a flambe. You know, there's no, you know, 151 in there. You just want to let the heat pass over the top and it's going to pop the bubbles. I'm going to show you here in a minute. But even after you make some passes and the bubbles disappear, more will come up. It's not pass the torch over, bam, bubbles gone. All right, put a lid on it and let's wait, 8 hours. No. Those bubbles will continue to rise until it starts to harden. And if it's poured too deep and the bubble doesn't surface in time from the bottom before it starts to harden, then that bubble will get trapped in there. Some bubbles will get trapped toward the bottom. Right here, I'm just making double sure that the bed is level, bringing some of the resin up over the top here. I'm working on a workbench and it's level, but sometimes, the foam piece you get might have a slight bow in it or something like that anyway. So I'm just making sure, you saw me put a little piece of shim under the foam base there. I want to make sure that it's level enough to get, so nothing all runs to the middle or something, and it stays giving me coverage throughout the bed. So here's the torch, and you can see I start to make some passes over it, getting rid of these bubbles. And the work time on this, I think it's like, it says like 8 hours, but as thick as I poured it, I just let it set, 24 hours anyway. And then we'll get to that here in a little bit too. So you can see I'm passing over this heat. Let the heat melt the bubbles. We're not staying by those styrofoam rocks too long. I don't want to burn anything up, melt anything. I'm feeling pretty good about this, man. I'm like, yes, this is just phenomenal. Great job, man. Totally love it. Making some Instagram content there. Totally love it, and I'm feeling glorious right now. I'm like, yes, this is just beautiful. And you could see with the torch there how I would have done well again to keep those rocks from being, if I would have put them last on the dive after I poured the resin, it would have been a little bit better, less chance of me melting something. So anyway, the bubbles continue to surface and we get them all off of there. Just some beautiful, I'm going to say this too, painting that bottom, the different shades of green really made this pop out. And I added a green transparent resin, a green transparent dye to this to also accentuate the sort of bay water, sort of, ugly kind of water look to it. I didn't want to do like a Bahamas, Caribbean kind of water scene. Everybody does those, man. I want some dirty stuff, man. Let's grime it up. I live in the city, and some spillway water, baby. And so at any rate, feeling pretty good here. I've got the bubbles all out and I'm waiting for any more that might pop up. And we're going to go out. My wife and I are going to go out to dinner this night. So I'm like, let me get this done. Let me, get this to where all the bubbles are out and everything's good. I want to pour a little bit more of this resin out of here. I want to get this to a place where it's just going to dry. I'm going to put a lid on it. It's going to dry and then we're going to go out to eat dinner. So that way I'm already ahead of the game, right? So I thought. Pour a little bit more in there. Just scrape a little bit more out of the side of that container. But it looks so pretty. This is really fun. And I will say the Envirotex light, there is no smell. I smelled nothing. Didn't need a respirator. Didn't need anything. I needed gloves because Resin and I have this understanding where if I dare touch it with my bare skin, it will remind me of what a poor decision that was. Same with, resin for my 3D printers. I have to wear gloves. I will get a rash, and it's like a poison oak kind of rash. It just sucks. So, once again, let's get these bubbles out of here. All these beautiful reflections, and it's like a Jolly Rancher, man. It's like a green apple Jolly Rancher right there in front of me, and it's just looking so glorious. Here's the dye that I used. It's a transparent dye. There are two kinds of dyes. There's the opaque dyes, which you cannot see through. Then there's the transparent dye, which is this, which is what I was after. Tap Plastics sold me this, and the resin also. I get a lot of stuff from my dioramas actually at Tap Plastics when it comes to like windows and plexiglass and things like that. They have a lot of that stuff there. My idea with this opaque resin was to create some waves splashing up, or some water splashing up along the rocks. I had seen some people do it like in making coasters and coffee tables and stuff, but it didn't work out for me like I thought it would. Surprise, surprise. Here are the bubbles after the resin has cured, and they are, let me tell you, I took the lid off this and I was like, oh no, I was hurt to the core. I felt really disappointed and defeated right here. I'm like, no way. I thought I got all the bubbles out. But bubbles continue to surface even after you think you got them all out. And especially on this because I poured it really deep. I poured it really thick all at once and didn't follow the instructions. Not to worry. I'm like, well, you know what, man, I can fix this. And I've got a razor here, and what I'm going to do, I watched some coffee table videos on people who make coffee tables, and I'm like, well, they use the same type of resin. What do they do when they get bubbles? And, for the most part, what they did is they, cut the bubbles out with a chisel or something with a straight edge and scraped them all off of there. And these are hard. These are like plastic bubbles, not like soapy bubbles. These are hard, dried, resin cured bubbles. And so they're you have to cut these bad boys off. And the people with the coffee tables and stuff, they sort of, got the bubbles off. They got it flushed. Then they sanded it with all these different grits, an abrasive grit all the way up to like a 2000 grit. Now, I didn't need to go that nuts with it. At first I thought, well, God, that's a lot of dang work, man. And I got to thinking, when I do 3D printing and I get a little chip or something and I want to fill it in, I just put resin right over the top and you can't ever tell where the chip was. There's no, as long as it's flush, there's no transition between, the gritty to like having to do it all the way up to a 2000 grit sandpaper to smooth it back out. You don't see that kind of thing on a 3D resin print. And so I'm like, well, let me just cut these bubbles off and we'll get it sanded and see how it looks from that point on. But I'm not going to lie. I was feeling really defeated right here. I woke up expecting to pull the top off this bad boy and just be in resin heaven. And I wasn't. And my heart sank a bit, not so much because of, that it wasn't like I wanted, but I wasn't sure at this point if I could fix it. And I had already created content for Instagram and TikTok showing me pour this and what a fun time it was going to be. So I needed to make this right. And there was a lot of time invested in this, laying down the terrain, carving out that styrofoam bed, airbrushing, plastering. There was a lot of investment of time in this, and I didn't want this to be what made me, have to scrap the whole project. So I was determined to find a way to bring this from a, probably right here, probably about a 30 out of 100 to at least bring it back up to about a 75 or an 80 because this was ruined right here, man. There was no hope for this. So there was a few bubbles that looked like jellyfish that had tried to come up and just couldn't make it to the surface to get popped in time before the resin cured. So I'm going back in and I'm just cutting down. I'm trying to make things flush around the hole, trying to make things as smooth. Some of these bubbles that are deep down there, I'm not going to worry about. They're not an issue. You're not going to see them when I do the photography. It's not an issue. The only issue that it is that I didn't do it right. And I'm going to know that I didn't do it right. So there's the issue there with, me realizing, that I should have followed the directions better. But outside of that, some of the bubbles that were real deep weren't going to be necessary for me to really have to go in and fix. It was the surface bubbles, the ones that I could get to on top that were really posing the problem. So we're going to get out the old Milwaukee. No, wait, is that Milwaukee? Milwaukee's green, right? No, that's Ryobi. I'm just kidding. It's Ryobi. I know. So we're going to get out the sander. And I'm nervous at this point, man. I take this dio outside. I start out with this 80 grit and I've cut everything flush. I cut the bubbles out. There's no uneven surface. And I'm just going to sand this down. I'm going to do it outside because this did get quite a bit dusty. It's resin and it's going into the air and you're going to breathe it. I would do this outside. If you don't listen to and read the instructions like I did, you're going to be at this point and you're going to want to do this outside. Here it is sanded. You can still see the bubbles though. They're pretty deep. But I've got the tops off. I've got the area sanded. You can see the real dull spots on there that I sanded. I'm going to remix some resin here and I'm going to pour it in, man. And I was really confident. I didn't see anything on the internet that sort of confirmed my thoughts, but having worked a little bit with resin on 3D printers, I was kind of confident that if I just poured this clear resin over the top of these, dull areas that I sanded down, you weren't going to see any marks from the sanding, the orbital sander. You weren't going to see any, any scratches or sand patterns or anything in there. This was going to do a great job at recovering it, making it shiny again, and filling in those bubble holes. As long as you cut them flush and there were no rims or any little rings, it was all flush. That was the trick, is to sand this down. I started with the 80 and then I just went to the 220. I wasn't going to no 2000. And so now we're going to mix the resin, like I say, 50-50, equal parts hardener in one deal, equal parts resin in the other, and then just mix them together and we'll pour that on there and I'll show you the outcome. I will say, I was worried. And when I got to this point, I wasn't as worried anymore. Because initially when I pulled the lid off, I was disappointed. I was like, man, can I fix this? I was really, my confidence was down because it appeared to be a bigger problem than it was. Did this create a lot more work for me? Yeah, it did. It created way more work than I had initially set out to do. But that's what I get for not following directions, not reading the instructions. And lesson learned, kick myself in the butt, move on, don't do it again. But when I got to this point and everything was sanded and flush, I was confident. I was feeling good again. I was like, yeah, this is going to work, man. I'm pretty sure I've done enough dios and done enough, stuff to know that I had a pretty good idea this was going to be, successful. And so we'll get this mixed up slowly out of frame and not directly over the dio so that I can spill it on the dio. It looks pretty, doesn't it? I'm going to put a little more green transparent dye in there. And I just love that green transparent dye. The next dio I do will be a more of a blue. I have some plans to do some other dios, but on a little bit smaller scale, but and definitely a thinner pour. Definitely not, inch and a quarter, inch and a half. $400 in resin on a $20 piece of styrofoam. Bonehead. But I wanted to share this with you. I think that you might get some benefit out of seeing my mistake and my error, and it's not always. I mean, maybe for some people, they just get right to it and everything comes out perfect the first time. A lot of times it does, but when you're doing something with a material like this that I've not used before, there's a potential for screwing it up even after you read the instructions, a few times, and so you can easily be discouraged and think, oh, it's you, but just know that it's not. I mean, stuff happens, and when you're doing stuff outside of your comfort zone, things are bound to happen. I mean, you might be successful the first time, and a lot of times things are successful the first time because we really plan and prepare and really plan out a process and stick to it and try to account for what could go wrong. And we plan the dial and try to keep it on track, and so it turns out right. But like I say, when you start to get out and do different stuff, there's the potential to mess up. But it's okay because I was able to fix this. But don't be discouraged if you mess up on something, and you can fix it. I mean, it's most of the time, unless you've lit it on fire or something and totally ruined it, but, which I was going to do with this. We're mixed up here. We're nice and good. We got the green that we want. We're going to pour this bad boy right over the holes. And this is self-leveling, so it kind of just spreads out after it goes on the holes and they fill in. It just kind of spreads out. And there's no bubbles really with this because it's such a thin pour. And those weren't going to be an issue. So, and you can see once we spread this out with the popsicle stick, it just instantly, you don't see the dough. The holes are filled in, and we just got to wait for it to dry. I was feeling so refreshed right here when I put this on. I was like, yeah, okay, man, it's going to happen now. It really came out nice. Now let me show you the end result. You're going to see weird reflections and things that look like scratches and stuff. They're just reflections and, probably me dragging over it with a paper towel or something. But down there at the bottom, there's a bubble way down there at the bottom. It's okay. You're not going to see it when I do a photograph. I'll Photoshop it out. Not worried about it. There's another bubble down there at the bottom. This is from pouring too thick. The bubble couldn't get out before it dried. But it's totally clear. See, there's a little foam around the edge. I didn't want to sand down around there because it was too close to the edge of the coastline there, and I thought that I would mess up the foam. So we just left that like it is, and I'll cover it with, I'll do a little Photoshop on it when I do my photo or something, or I'll put some old tires in there or something to hide it. But not a big deal. But way, way better than it was. It went from what I was going to think would be 100 down to a 30, back up to about a 75. We got a little contraction there around the top, and I think once again that happened just on that spot right there. It sort of shrunk back a little bit, and I think that happened really because I poured it really deep. An inch and a half or inch and a quarter or so was pretty deep. But to be honest, all that airbrushing at the bottom just made this look really, really deeper than it is, and I really love it. Hey, if you like this, man, follow me, share my art, follow me on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. I appreciate everybody watching, man. Hope my errors can help you create something awesome, and we'll see you in the next video.